My husband said that without him I was nobody.
Later, I started my own business and he asked me to hire him. I still remember that evening like it was yesterday, the way the lamppost outside our tiny living room window spilled pale yellow light across the floor, casting long, wavering shadows. I sat on the worn-out sofa, clutching a mug of tea as if it were my lifeline. My husband, Mark, stood in front of me, arms crossed, eyes cold. "You're nobody without me," he said flatly. His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I felt the weight of them, the sting of betrayal more than anger. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend myself. But I said nothing. I only let the silence scream back at him. We'd been married for 7 years. In that time, I'd quit my job to support his career, his dreams, his ambitions. I was proud of him, always believed in him. I managed the household, kept our apartment spotless, made sure dinner was on the table every night, worked behind the scenes while he worked late nights and early mornings. I loved him, and I thought he loved me too. But that night, his words shattered everything. I felt small and foolish for believing that I mattered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, his cold shoulder, my silent tears, the soft hum of our TV. The mug of tea sat forgotten in my lap, growing cold. The next morning, I woke with the ache of humiliation lingering in my chest. I could have let it crush me. I could have drifted back into the role he expected, obedient, invisible. But something inside snapped. Not in a dramatic way, just a steady click, like a latch releasing. I knew I had to do something. For me, not for him. I dressed quietly, feeling the weight of my resolve settling in. I didn't tell Mark where I was going. I took a deep breath of the crisp morning air outside and walked to the local business incubator, a place I'd passed hundreds of times but never dared enter. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open. The receptionist greeted me with polite curiosity. I mumbled my intentions and took a seat while the staff assessed a proposal I'd printed on crumpled sheets of paper. That proposal was the result of nights spent writing and rewriting in my head. I wanted to start an online boutique, women's fashion, inclusive sizing, at accessible prices. I'd done my homework, market research, supplier contacts, minimalist website mockups, forecasts. I just needed a chance. 4 hours later, I left with a contract to rent a co-working desk and mentorship sessions lined up for the next month. Mark came home that evening and found me glowing. My eyes were alight with something I realized I'd forgotten: hope. I showed him the documents. I explained the plan. He watched me with the same distant look I'd seen the night before, skepticism, maybe even contempt. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't ask questions. He said nothing. A week later, I launched a simple website. I used my savings to buy a small inventory. I set up social media posts and reached out to friends to help spread the word. I was terrified, my hands shook every time I clicked publish. But I did it anyway. The first sale came at 3:24 p.m. I watched the notification pop up on my screen and I cried. A stranger, a real person, had just sent me money for a dress. I screamed across the apartment, "Mark! I sold a dress!" He looked up from his laptop, surprised. Then he said, "That's good." Just those 2 words, fronted with skepticism but trailing off in silence. I kept my jubilation to myself. It wasn't about him anymore. Days turned into weeks. My boutique steadily grew. I found a local seamstress to help with alterations. I started networking at evening meetups. Each sale gave me confidence, each compliment reminded me I had value. I still shared meals with Mark, but I no longer waited for his approval. I didn't ask for it. I asked it from myself. By the end of the second month, I was managing inventory, handling shipping, running the website, all on top of caring for our home. My schedule stayed busy. I kept the ups and downs hidden from Mark, not wanting to risk his criticism. I started to schedule meetings and deadlines around his work hours. I realized I no longer feared being alone. Then came an evening I will never forget. I was listing new arrivals on the site when Mark walked in. He leaned against the counter and really watched me, for the first time in months. "You've been busy," he said quietly. "Yes," I replied, not looking up. He hesitated. "How much are you making a month?" I paused. Not sure I wanted to answer out loud. But I did. Roughly $3,000 in revenue, netting maybe $800 or $900. He blinked. That's not nothing. And there it was, acknowledgement. He wasn't praising me, but he was seeing me. Seeing me work, creating value, building something.
I swallowed hard, feeling both vindication and sadness. Because I realized how little I'd needed to prove to him, to the world, to know my own worth. But this was only the beginning. Over the next weeks, the boutique picked up momentum. I hired a freelance graphic designer to polish the look. I collaborated with influencers for small campaigns. I encountered setbacks, fabric shipments delayed, returns, rude customer emails. Each time, I solved the problem. I adapted. I persevered. I felt alive. One evening, Mark came home defeated. He slammed his laptop shut inside. He looked at me. I looked back, exhausted but determined. He hesitated, then said, "Maybe I should find something on your team." His voice sounded unsure, like he was repeating something he'd rehearsed. A rush of emotions surged through me. Relief, anger, disbelief. All tangled together. I asked, "That's what you want?" He nodded. I stared at him. The man who tried to diminish me. The man who believed I could do nothing without him. And now he wanted in on my world. I opened my mouth to speak, and then closed it. Because the night was young, and our journey was just beginning, his and mine, but on my terms. Not as a nobody, but as someone who'd found herself when she dared to start over. I didn't give Mark an answer that night. I told him I needed time to think. That was the truth, though not in the way he probably imagined. I needed time to process what it meant for him to ask for a role in something he once believed I couldn't build. That night, I lay awake longer than I expected. My thoughts were a mess of history and new beginnings. I wasn't vengeful, not really. I didn't want to hurt him. But I couldn't deny the grim satisfaction in knowing that the power dynamic had shifted. He was still asleep when I got up early the next morning. I padded into the kitchen, made coffee, then opened my laptop. I had 3 orders to fulfill, a restock email from my supplier, and a new customer inquiry about international shipping. Business was steady, more than steady. My website's analytics had hit a record high the night before, and a boutique in another state had emailed asking about a potential collaboration. I handled everything with practiced efficiency, then paused with my hand hovering over the keyboard. I pulled up a blank document and began writing out what a potential job for Mark could look like. But the words didn't come easily. What could I even trust him with? Could he take direction from me? Could he handle reporting to the woman he once told was nobody? I tried to imagine him managing shipping logistics or overseeing inventory. But the thought left a sour taste in my mouth. Later that afternoon, we sat down at the kitchen table. I could tell he was nervous. He wore the same look he did during his quarterly reviews at work, rigid, overly polite. "So," I said, opening my notebook. "Tell me what kind of role you see yourself in." He shifted uncomfortably. "I could help with marketing. Or customer service. I've got experience, you know. I used to run campaigns for the firm." "That was 3 years ago," I replied. "And this is a very different kind of business." "I know. But I could learn. I want to help." I studied him. There was something unfamiliar in his voice, humility. It wasn't groveling, but it wasn't arrogant either. Still, I wasn't sure if it was real, or just a temporary break in his pride. "Okay," I said slowly. "I'll try you out on a trial basis. 1 month. You'll answer to me. You'll log hours. I'll pay you a starting rate, nothing fancy, just what I'd pay a freelancer. And if you underperform, you're out." His eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Fair enough." The first week was tense. He seemed uncomfortable taking instruction. I asked him to draft 5 customer reply templates, and he delivered them 3 days late. I had to re-edit each one. I corrected him firmly but politely. He said nothing, just took notes. I could see the struggle in his posture. He wasn't used to being the junior partner in anything. Especially not in a relationship where he used to set the rules. But I also saw effort. He stayed up late studying e-commerce strategies. He watched videos on social media engagement and wrote down ideas in a notebook. I gave him a social media campaign to run, a simple one featuring our summer line. He put it together slowly, hesitantly, but he did it. When we posted it, engagement jumped. I gave him credit. "Nice job," I said casually over dinner. He looked at me like he hadn't heard those words in a long time. 2 weeks into the trial, I asked him to join a virtual meeting with a wholesale buyer who'd shown interest in our line. He was quiet during most of the call but stepped in near the end with a suggestion about bundling options. It was smart. I included his idea in the follow-up proposal. We got the contract 2 days later. That night, he came into the room holding 2 cups of tea. "I wanted to say thank you," he said, "for giving me a chance." I blinked. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no sarcasm. No edge. "You're earning it," I replied. "Don't thank me yet." We smiled at each other for the first time in what felt like months. Still, I didn't let myself forget the past. I kept my guard up. One campaign doesn't erase 7 years of emotional erosion. But I did let myself feel something unfamiliar, cautious optimism. The rest of the month passed quickly. Sales grew. Our workflow stabilized. We fought less, talked more. He started suggesting morning walks before work. He made breakfast twice a week. Nothing dramatic, but different. I began to feel like I wasn't just rediscovering myself, I was relearning the kind of relationship I deserved. When the trial period ended, I asked for a meeting in my tiny home office. I sat at my desk, he on the armchair. "I'm extending your contract," I said simply. "Part-time for now. You've done well. But we still have work to do. Both of us." He nodded, not surprised. "Thank you. Anne. I'm sorry. For everything before." There it was. I didn't say, "It's okay." Because it wasn't. But I did say, "Thank you for saying that." We sat in silence for a while. Not awkward. Just quiet understanding. It's funny how life turns. How words like nobody can echo in your head for years until you replace them with your own voice. And mine had gotten stronger. Clearer. Not just in business, but in life. I wasn't just hiring my husband. I was finally choosing myself. Things didn't magically become perfect after I officially brought Mark onto the team, but there was a rhythm forming, something that almost resembled partnership. We were navigating unfamiliar terrain, both professionally and personally. I was still learning how to lead without second-guessing myself, and he was learning how to follow without resentment. It wasn't always smooth. There were days I had to remind him, gently but firmly, that feedback wasn't personal. Like when he miscalculated shipping rates for a bulk order and it cost us nearly $200. He came to me, shoulders tense, waiting for a scolding. I didn't yell. I simply walked him through where it went wrong, helped him correct it, and we moved forward. He looked at me differently after that. Maybe he expected me to be like how he used to be, with sharp criticisms and thin patience. But I wasn't. I didn't want to recreate the dynamic we once had. I wanted better. We settled into a groove. I focused on expansion. He handled support tickets and social media engagement. I onboarded a virtual assistant to help with order fulfillment. Our living room slowly transformed into a mini logistics hub. The dining table was often covered in samples, packaging materials, and return slips. Our couch was home to boxes awaiting pickup. The brand was growing faster than I had planned. One of our early collaborations with a local lifestyle influencer took off unexpectedly. Her post wearing our floral midi dress went viral, and within 48 hours, we were flooded with over 100 orders. I stayed up past 2 a.m. with Mark and our assistant, carefully packaging each one by hand, checking sizes, printing labels. I was tired, my back ached, and my eyes burned, but I felt alive. "This is wild," Mark said as he sealed a box I never imagined. He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. I knew. He never imagined me doing this. Thriving. A week later, we got an offer. A local women's co-working space wanted me to come speak about my journey, how I built a successful online brand from scratch. The email subject line was "Empowerment in Action." I read it twice before calling Mark over to see. "That's big," he said, and to his credit, he didn't sound surprised, he sounded proud. The event was surreal. I stood in front of a room of 30 women, telling my story. From the night Mark said I was nobody, to launching my first website, to hiring my first team members. I didn't dramatize anything. I told the truth, the fear, the grit, the moments I nearly gave up. Afterward, 3 women came up to me, almost tearful, telling me they saw themselves in my story. That they had partners who didn't believe in them. That they'd put their dreams on hold for others. I walked home that night changed. Not because I'd spoken in public, but because I realized how many women had stories like mine. quietly shrinking to fit into someone else's spotlight. And I had stepped out of it. I had created my own. Mark waited up for me.
I found him reading product reviews on our site, highlighting customer feedback.
He looked up and smiled. "How'd it go?" he asked. "It was overwhelming. In a good way." "I'm proud of you," he said. I believed him.
That weekend, we had dinner with friends, an old couple from his side we hadn't seen in a while.
They asked about work. Mark gestured toward me and said, "She's the boss now. I work for her."
It was a joke, but also not. Everyone laughed, but I caught the flicker in his eyes, a mix of pride and something else.
Something like awe. It wasn't performative. He meant it.
After dinner, as we walked home under a sky dusted with stars, he took my hand.
"Do you ever think we could start over?" he asked softly. I stopped walking. "Start over how?" I asked. "Like us. Fresh. No more old roles. No more keeping score. Just as we are now." I didn't answer right away.
The night breeze whispered through the trees. I thought about everything we'd been through, the good, the bad, the silence, the growth.
"I think we already have," I said finally. "It's just taking time to notice."
We didn't talk much after that. Just walked in step, hand in hand, like two people trying to find their way back to something real, not what we had, but what we could build.
By the next month, we were moving into a small rented office.
It was modest, a single room with large windows and creaky floors, but it was ours. I brought in a designer to paint the walls a soft cream, added some plants, hung a pinboard covered in sketches and order charts. I remember standing in that space on the first day, watching the morning light spill across the floor. I turned to Mark, who was fiddling with the Wi-Fi router, and said, "This started in our apartment." He looked around, then back at me.
"Now look at you." I smiled. "No. Look at us."
Because the truth was, I had done the hard part, finding my voice, building something real. But I had also done something else, maybe even harder. I let someone back in, on my own terms. And that's what made all the difference.
Settling into the office gave the business a new sense of legitimacy.
Even though we were still small by most standards, the simple act of unlocking a door in the morning, flipping on the lights, and walking into a space that belonged solely to the company, it meant something.
It meant this was real. Tangible. No longer a hobby, no longer something to dismiss. And Mark seemed to understand that now, too. We kept things lean.
Just me, Mark, and our assistant, Nina, who joined full-time soon after we opened the office.
She was 26, sharp, and quietly brilliant.
She brought systems to our madness, organized the back stock, implemented a real order tracking process, and cleaned up the endless clutter of spreadsheets that I had been too busy to streamline.
Mark and Nina worked well together.
To my surprise, he deferred to her often, especially in areas where he knew she had the expertise. He'd changed, not overnight, and not completely, but enough that I didn't feel like I was dragging someone uphill anymore.
One morning, I came in early to find a sticky note on my desk. It was in Mark's handwriting. "You're not just somebody, you're the reason this works."
I stared at it for a while. I didn't cry, though I felt something tighten in my chest. It wasn't just about the compliment, it was about how far we'd come.
How far I had come.
We were preparing for our first big seasonal sale, Fall Fest. It was my idea to brand it as a small online festival, complete with new arrivals, limited releases, behind-the-scenes content, and a live Q&A.
We'd been working on it for weeks. I'd poured every creative spark I had into it.
Mark was in charge of promotion. He had scheduled emails, posts, and influencer content down to the minute.
We ran rehearsals for the live stream.
I was nervous, more than I wanted to admit, but I told myself that fear was just part of growth. The night before the launch, Mark surprised me.
He'd put together a little celebration in the office. Nina had helped.
There were cupcakes from my favorite bakery, a small balloon arch near the door, and a handmade banner that read, "Fall Fest, let's make history." "You didn't have to do all this," I said, trying not to tear up.
"We wanted to," he replied. "You deserve to be celebrated." I looked around the room. It wasn't just a business anymore. It was a world I had built from nothing. And these people, my husband, my assistant, our customers, they were part of that world now. The sale launched at midnight. I barely slept. Notifications flooded in. Orders. Comments. Shares. The site didn't crash, thankfully, and by morning, we had quadrupled our usual daily revenue. By the end of the week, we had hit numbers I used to only dream about. We sat in the office late one evening, post-sale, tired but giddy. Mark turned to me and said, "Remember when I told you that you were nobody without me?" I stiffened slightly, unsure of where he was going with it. "I think about that a lot," he continued. "About how wrong I was. About how small I made you feel." I said nothing. He reached for my hand. "You didn't need me to become somebody. You already were. I just couldn't see it. And I'm sorry." There it was, said out loud. A moment of reckoning. I could have let that moment hang awkwardly. I could have brushed it off. But I didn't. "Thank you," I said. "That means something." It did. It couldn't erase the years of silence, the way he once dimmed my light to make his seem brighter. But it meant he'd noticed. And that mattered more than I expected. In the weeks that followed, I started receiving more invitations, podcasts, panels, and even a feature in a local magazine about women entrepreneurs. My name was out there now. Not as his wife, but as me. One night, after an especially long meeting with a potential investor, I came home to find dinner waiting. Candles lit. A bouquet of daisies, my favorite, on the table. Mark poured wine and said, "Tonight, we celebrate you. No business talk. Just us." We ate slowly, laughed more than we had in months. It felt like rediscovery. Like dating again, but with the knowledge of everything we'd been through, the cracks, the scars, and the growth that made us both softer, better. He raised a glass and said, "To the woman who built an empire from a whisper." I didn't know what to say. So I clinked my glass against his and said, "To the man who learned to listen." 6 months after Fall Fest, we hit our first six-figure milestone. I stared at the number in our financial dashboard for a long time, long enough for the screen to go dim. It didn't feel real, not because I didn't believe in myself, but because the version of me who once stood in the kitchen hearing, "You're nobody without me," would never have imagined this life. I printed the screenshot and pinned it to the office corkboard. Right next to our first handwritten order receipt and the sticky note Mark left months earlier. Nina cried when I showed her. "This is huge," she whispered. "You did this." "We did this," I corrected, and meant it. We were no longer a fledgling brand. We had regular customers, repeat clients, and 2 small boutiques across the country carrying our designs. I had a speaking slot booked at a regional entrepreneur summit. I had stopped waiting for someone else's validation and started trusting my own voice. And Mark had truly become my teammate. It was strange at first, watching him step into a supportive role. Not because I didn't think he could, but because I never thought he would. Yet there he was, sending weekly performance summaries, brainstorming product bundles, proposing ad strategies, and even managing our vendor relations. One night, he came into the office holding 2 mugs of tea, like he used to when he first joined me. "You ever think about what you'd be doing now if you hadn't started this?" he asked. I laughed softly. Honestly? I might still be shrinking myself to fit into someone else's life. He nodded, slowly. "And now you're the one people are watching." It wasn't said with jealousy. It was said with pride. Like someone who finally understood that lifting someone else up didn't mean losing ground, it meant building higher, together. I still thought about that version of myself sometimes. The one who used to flinch at criticism, who doubted her worth every time someone else took up more space. I didn't hate her. She tried her best with what she knew. But she didn't know how far she could go until she was pushed to the edge. Months rolled on, and we faced new challenges. A supplier suddenly shut down. A major return issue caused a temporary dip in our finances. A campaign flopped. But I didn't panic. I'd learned how to pivot. How to lead. How to ask for help when I needed it, and how to keep moving even when things didn't go to plan. The biggest shift wasn't in the revenue, or the office, or even our growing team. It was in me. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I started walking into meetings with my shoulders back. I learned how to say no without guilt and yes without hesitation. And somewhere along the way, I stopped waiting for Mark to approve of me. One evening, we hosted a small gathering for the team. Just snacks, music, a slideshow of our growth over the past year. As we stood in front of the projector screen, watching pictures of our early days flash by the cramped living room, the first logo sketches, the DIY packaging station, I felt something shift inside me. Mark leaned over and said, "You know, I've never told you this, But when I first said those words to you, that you were nobody, I was scared. Scared of what? Scared that you'd realize you didn't need me. That you were already so much more than I was willing to admit. I think I said it to keep you small because I was afraid of what would happen if you grew. I turned to him. And what did happen? He smiled. You grew. And I'm glad you did. The next day, I signed a lease on a new office, twice the size, closer to downtown. I brought my team in to see it. Nina screamed. Mark just stood there, smiling. I walked to the center of the space, turned in a slow circle, and whispered to myself, nobody, huh? The girl who once doubted everything now ran a business. She inspired others. She created jobs. She made decisions every day that shaped her own future. The woman I am now isn't angry at the man who said those words. She doesn't need revenge or apologies. She has something better. She has proof. Proof that she didn't need to be chosen, validated, or saved. She just needed one moment of defiance. One moment to say, I'm more than this, and take the first step forward. And now she's unstoppable. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.